Imagine a 12-year-old boy. He is at the top of a stone pillar, hundreds of meters high, with the wind whipping hard against his face and the mountains of China spreading out as far as the eye can see. Below him, nothing, only air, mist, and a drop you don't even want to imagine. And he lifts just one leg. He stays still like that, in perfect balance, as if the entire world had slowed down for this single moment. Essa is the image that defines the 2010 Karate Kid. It's not a fight. It's not a trophy. It's a boy who arrived here from nothing, literally nothing, from Detroit, without speaking a word of Mandarin, without knowing anyone, without understanding anything around him, found in this impossible place something inside himself that he didn't even know existed. And what makes this moment so powerful is that you know how much it cost him to get there. Before talking about the film itself, you need to understand the context in which it was made. Because when the title Karate Kid appeared in 2010 with Jaden Smith in the lead role and Jackie Chan as the master, the reaction from many people was immediate skepticism. Just another unnecessary remake. It's just Will Smith putting his son in everything. It has nothing to do with the original. These criticisms appeared in forums, in film reviews, in bar conversations, and it's true that some of them have a basis. But here is what is equally true. This film has something that many family action blockbusters don't have. It has heart. It has real pain. It has characters you truly feel for. And it has a performance from Jackie Chan that most people weren't expecting. A quiet, contained performance carried by an emotional weight that goes straight to the chest. This is not a perfect film. No film is. But it is a film that deserves more respect than it normally receives. So let's start from the beginning. Trey Parker is 11 years old, lives in Detroit with his mother Sherry, and has a modest but full life. He has friends, he has his neighborhood, he has that girl from school he hasn't had the courage to talk to yet but who lives in his thoughts. You get to know this world in the first few minutes of the film. It's a small world, but it's his world. And when his mother comes home announcing they've been transferred her to China as a technician for a car factory, Dre's life collapses in real dash time. It's no exaggeration to say that this moment captures well what it's like to be a child and have no control over anything. Dre doesn't want to go. Dre didn't choose to go. Dre goes. And there begins the heart of the film. What happens when you are ripped from everything you know and thrown into a place where neither the language, nor the customs, nor the rules you learned work anymore? What is left of you when everything that was familiar disappears? The answer the film gives is not simple. It's not you discover you were strong all along. It's more complicated than that, because Dre doesn't find strength inside him suddenly. He finds humiliation first. He finds fear. He finds loneliness. And only after going through all that, after falling many times, literally and figuratively does he begin to understand what being strong really means. This is the film. It's a film about displacement, about grief, not the kind of loss that comes with death, but the kind of loss that comes when one life is replaced by another and you have no choice in the matter. It's about the difference between discipline used as a growth tool and discipline used as a control weapon. And, at its core, it's about the relationship between a boy who lost his way and a man who lost everything, and what happens when these two meet at the right time. The name of the film is technically wrong. Dre Parker never learns karate at any point. What he learns is Kung Fu specifically, a style inspired by the traditions of the temples in the Wudang Mountains of China. The film's executive producer, who is Will Smith, Jaden's father, and the production team at Entertainment knew this from the start. But they chose to keep the title Karate Kid because it was the name that carried immediate recognition with the audience since 1984. It was a commercial decision, and it was honest about it. Jackie Chan himself commented in interviews that it was strange to teach Kung Fu in a movie called Karate Kid, but that he understood the logic. This detail, the wrong name for the right martial arts, says a lot about the film. It exists between two worlds. It's American in its structure and protagonist. It's Chinese in its soul and setting. It's a remake, but it works as an original story. It's a youth film, but it carries an adult sadness that you didn't expect to find here. The China in the film is not decoration. It is a character. When Dre arrives in Beijing, you feel the shock along with him. The scale of the streets, the massive apartment blocks, the unfamiliar sounds, the faces that look at him with curiosity or indifference. All of this was filmed in real locations. The production team secured permission from the Chinese government to film in the Forbidden City, on the Great Wall, in the temples of the Wudang Mountains. They weren't replicas. They weren't sets built in a studio in Los Angeles. It was the real China, and that makes a difference on screen. You feel the historical weight of these places when Dre trains in front of ruins that are centuries old. When he climbs stone stairs that were stepped on by emperors, the size of the world around him contrasts with how small he still is. It's a visual choice that director Harold Zwart used consciously to show that Dre's journey isn't just physical, it's a journey of stature. He needs to grow until he reaches the place where he stands. Zwart's direction is not revolutionary. He doesn't reinvent anything from a cinematographic point of view. But he does something that many family action movie directors get wrong. He gives the film time to breathe. There are scenes that exist just for you to feel where Dre is emotionally. There are moments of silence that speak louder than any dialogue. And then there's James Horner. The soundtrack of this film is beautiful, and almost no one talks about it. Horner, who had just finished Avatar, and who sadly passed away in 2015 in a plane crash, composed a score that mixes Western orchestral instrumentation with elements of traditional Chinese music. There is a delicacy in the music of this film that elevates scenes that could have been ordinary. The first time Dre watches Maine play the violin in the park, Horner's music enters almost imperceptibly. You feel that moment matters long before you understand why. In the next chapters of this video, we are going to go through every piece of this film with care. We'll talk about how it was produced, about the casting choices, about the months of training Jaden Smith went through to reach the physical form the role demanded. We'll talk about the story of pain that Jackie Chan built behind Mr. Hanna. Story that isn't explicit in the script, but that Chan carried in every scene. We'll analyze every fight of the final tournament, understand why the villain of this film is more complex than he seems on the surface, and discover why the jacket scene was called one of the smartest training sequences in the entire franchise. And we'll talk about what happened at the box office, because the world expected a failure and received one of the biggest hits of the summer of 2010. But it all begins in the same place where it begins for Dre Parker. In an empty apartment, in a strange city, in a silence that hurts. sometime between 2007 and 2008. Will Smith was sitting in a meeting room with the partners of his production company, Overbrook Entertainment, and someone put an idea on the table that, at the time, seemed both obvious and completely crazy. What if we remade The Karate Kid? It wasn't an illogical idea. The original 1984 film, directed by John G. Avildsen and starring Ralph Macchio and Pat Morita, was an American cultural classic, a coming-of-age story that had crossed generations. It had entered the popular vocabulary in a way that few films manage. Wax on. Wax off is a phrase that people who have never even watched the film recognize. The franchise had produced 3 sequels, an animated series, and in 1994 a spin-off, with Hilary Swank, called The Next Karate Kid. But since then, the character had disappeared from the screens. From a commercial point of view, the logic was simple: an established intellectual property with built-in nostalgia in a format that worked well with families. But Will Smith wasn't just thinking about business. He was thinking about his son. Jaden Smith was 10 years old at the time of the first conversations about the project. Will had already put Jaden in the cinema before the boy had appeared alongside his father in A Pursuit of Happiness in 2006, in a role that was emotionally demanding and that Jaden had executed with a naturalness that drew attention. But Will wanted something bigger for him. He wanted a project that was Jaden's, not a scene of Jaden in his father's movie. The Karate Kid seemed perfect, but there was a problem. Making a direct remake of the original, set in the United States, with a teenager learning karate that would just be a copy. And copies, by definition, never surpass the original. If you're going to reinvent something, you need to find an angle that justifies the existence of the new. You need a true reason for the film to exist, beyond the money. The solution the team found was radical. Change everything except the emotional structure. Move the story to China. The idea of setting the remake in Beijing came from several places at once. First, there was the growing Chinese film Ma Chi Chi Na was rapidly becoming one of the biggest box offices in the world, and a film shot in real Chinese locations, with Chinese actors in significant roles, would have huge appeal in the country. Second, there was the artistic question. China offered a visual, historical, and cultural backdrop that the United States simply couldn't replicate. The Forbidden City, the Great Wall, the mountain temples, these places carried a weight that would visually transform the film. And third, and perhaps most importantly, there was Kung Fu. If the character was going to China, he wouldn't learn karate. He would learn Kung Fu. And Kung Fu has a philosophical, spiritual, and artistic tradition that is deeply different from Japanese karate. Chinese Kung Fu is linked to Taoism, to traditional medicine, to the idea that the body and mind are inseparable. This gave the script written by Christopher Murphy depth of meaning that would be harder to reach with the original material. Christopher Murphy was given the task of writing the script with a clear instruction: use the emotional arc of the original as a skeleton, but build a completely new story on top of that skeleton. The result was a script that preserves recognizable structural points: new kid in town, bully who pursues him, unlikely master, final tournament, but fills each of those points with different material. The villain has a different motivation. The master has a different tragedy, and the meaning of the training is different. In the original, Mr. Miyagi's Wax On Wax Off teaches karate through muscle memory disguised as housework. In the remake, the equivalent is jacket on, jacket off, picking the jacket up from the floor, putting it on, taking it off, folding it, throwing it, repeating until exhausted. And this choice is not random. The jacket in the film has an emotional weight that the wax cloth in the original doesn't have in the same way. The jacket belongs to Dre. It's the first thing that appears in the training scene. And the act of picking it up from the floor, refusing to leave something lying on the floor, will become, literally, the technique that saves Dre and the Turnham and Murphy worked on the script for over a year. There were multiple versions, with changes in the age of the protagonist, who at one point was considered older, around 15 or 16, before being rejuvenated to 12 and in the depth of Mr. Han's arc. The story of Han's lost family was added in a later revision of the script, following conversations with Jackie Chan about the character, and Jackie Chan was the only choice for Mr. Han. Overbrook Production approached Chan in 2008. The logic was clear. Chan was the biggest name in martial arts cinema in the Western world. He had a relationship with the American audience that came from Rush Hour, from Shanghai Nights, from decades of impossible stunts he did with his own body, without a double. But the team knew they needed Chan in a different capacity here. They didn't want the comedic and acrobatic Jackie Chan. They wanted Jackie Chan the actor. Chan was interested. But he had conditions. The first was that the character should not be a copy of Pat Morita's Mr. Miyagi. Miyagi was a Zen master, quiet, with a dry humor and a wisdom that seemed to come from another plane of existence. Han needed to be something else, more human, more broken, more visible in his pain. Chan wanted Han to have a wound that the film showed without shame. The second condition was that the martial arts scenes be real, that Jaden Smith actually learned Kung Fu, that there were no camera and editing shortcuts masking a lack of technical skill. Chan had a reputation built on decades of work that he didn't want to compromise with a film where the fights were fake. Both conditions were accepted. The decision to involve the China Films Group Corporation as a co-producer was fundamental to securing the access to the locations the film needed. China Films Group is the largest film producer and distributor in China, controlled by the government. Without their involvement, filming in the Forbidden City would be impossible. With them, the project gained the status of an official Sino-American co-production, something that was rare in 2009, and that opened doors that American money alone couldn't open. The film's production budget was set at $40 million, number considered modest for a summer blockbuster, but which was justified by the fact that China offered locations that were, in themselves, production value beyond measure. There was no way to build the Great Wall on a film set. And then there was the question of the title. Internally, there were serious debates about whether the film should be called The Karate Kid. After all, the protagonist learns Kung Fu, not karate. The two are completely different martial arts, originating in distinct countries and cultures. Kung Fu is Chinese, with roots going back to the Shaolin monasteries and the Taoist traditions of the Wudang Mountains. Karate is Okinawan Japanese, developed as a combat art in a completely different tradition. Keeping the name Karate Kid for a film about Kung Fu was, technically, an inaccuracy, but it was also immediate recognition. It was nostalgia. It was a brand. Sony Pictures, which distributed the film, was clear. The title remained, and the production accepted it. Jackie Chan commented on this in several interviews with a smile. "I explained Kung Fu for 2 hours, and the title still says Kara, but it's okay. The audience understands." Director Harold Zewett himself acknowledged the irony in interviews with the Los Angeles Times, calling it the most honestly dishonest detail of the film. There was also a narrative choice behind maintaining the title that worked symbolically. Dre Parker is American. He arrives in China knowing nothing about the local culture. From his perspective, in the beginning, Kung Fu and Karate are the same thing. They are Asian martial arts that he doesn't distinguish. The title reflects the point of view of a boy who hasn't yet learned the difference. And the film is, in part, the journey of learning that difference. It's a generous reading, but it's not wrong. The film that began as a commercial bet by Will Smith for his son transformed throughout development into something with more layers than anyone expected. The choice of China, the choice of Jackie Chan as a dramatic actor, the choice of a script that deals with grief and displacement, all of this was built one piece at a time, and the next piece was the most difficult. Preparing a 10-year-old boy to become a cinematic martial artist in less than a year. In July 2009, an American production team landed in Beijing with cameras, lighting equipment, a multinational cast, and a list of locations that, at first, any experienced producer would have called impossible. Filming in the Forbidden City, filming on the Great Wall, filming in the sacred temples of the Wudang Mountains in the interior of Hubei province, filming in the streets, in the parks, in the hutongs, the ancient alleys of Beijing that survived. Centuries of urban transformation. The list wasn't wishful thinking. It was the script. And what made all of this possible was the co-production with China Films Group Corporation, the cinematic arm of the Chinese government. Without this formal agreement, Overbrook Entertainment and Sony Pictures would not have had access to any of these places. The Forbidden City is a national heritage. The Great Wall is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Wudang temples are protected historical sites. They are not places where you just show up with a camera and start. Filming the negotiation process took months. It involved diplomatic discussions beyond the commercial ones. And it resulted in something that, up to that point, was practically unprecedented in mainstream American cinema. A Hollywood production with real, authorized, and professionally filmed access in some of China's most iconic places. Principal production began in July 2009 and extended until October of the same year. 4 months of filming in locations spread across different regions of China. Beijing was the operational center. It was where most of the urban scenes were filmed, where the apartments, streets, parks, and schools were. The team set up base in the city and operated from there, making trips to the more distant locations as the schedule required. Beijing, in 2009, was a city in rapid transformation. The 2008 Olympic Games had left behind new infrastructure and a national self-confidence that was felt in the streets. The city that appears in the film is at once modern and ancient. Skyscrapers of glass and steel on the horizon, while in the foreground are stone walls that are 600 years old. This juxtaposition was not manipulated by the production. It was simply how Beijing was. And director Harold Zewett was smart enough to let the city speak for itself. The director of photography was Roger Pratt, a British veteran with an impressive resume that included Tim Burton's Batman, The Name of the Rose, and 2 Harry Potter films. Pratt understood that China didn't need to be beautified, needed to be framed. There is a difference. Beautifying would be adding filters, manipulating light to create a postcard China. Framing is finding the right angle, the right time of day, the right relationship between the character and the space around them. Pratt did this with a consistency that gives the film a visual quality surpassing what is normally seen in productions of this type. The scene of dawn in the Forbidden City, where Dre wakes up early to find elderly people doing Tai Chi in the courtyard, is photographed with a golden and soft light that looks like a painting. Not because there was excessive manipulation, but because the light at that hour in that place really is like that. And someone had the care to be there with the camera at the right moment. The sequence in the Wudang Mountains was the most complex, logistically, and the most rewarding visually. The Wudang Mountains are located about 1,000 kilometers from Beijing, in Hubei province. They are known as the birthplace of Taoist Kung Fu, the origin of the Wudang style that combines martial movement with meditation and philosophy. The temples that dot the mountains were built during the Ming dynasty in the 15th century and are extraordinarily well preserved. Reaching some of them requires hours of walking on stone trails that climb up rock faces. The production took Jaden Smith, Jackie Chan, and a small team there to film the sequence where Mr. Han takes Dre to the mountains as part of the training. It is in this sequence that the most iconic image of the film appears, Dre balanced on a stone column, with the valley around him and the sky occupying half of the frame. This scene required careful physical preparation. The stone column where Jaden was positioned was real. The height was real. There were safety measures that don't appear on camera cables, fixed at strategic points, a safety team positioned out of the frame. But the sense of height, of isolation, of a boy alone above the world, that was genuine. Jaden Smith reported in interviews that was one of the most intense experiences of the filming, not because of the fear of falling the safety measures were rigorous, but because of the silence. In the Wudang Mountains, far from the city, silence has a different quality. It's a silence you feel in your chest. And it was this silence that entered the scene along with him. The Great Wall was filmed in a specific section north of Beijing, in an area less frequented by tourists than the more famous stretches. The production chose a part of the wall with a perspective showing the structure curving through the mountain relief in the background. One of the film's most recognizable visual compositions. Filming there required coordination with the historical preservation authorities and was done during dawn, when the wall was closed to visitors, the Forbidden City. The Imperial Palace of Beijing that served as the center of Chinese imperial power for nearly 500 years appears in a sequence where Dre's class makes a school visit. This permission was considered extraordinary by film industry observers. The Forbidden City receives millions of tourists a year, but it receives very few film productions, especially foreign ones. The co-production agreement with China Films was what opened that door. There is also a scene filmed in a Beijing park where elderly people practice martial arts at Donna Real and everyday practice in parks throughout China. The production didn't create this scene. They simply showed up early enough to film it happening. This is one of the differences filming on real location makes. You capture life that no set could reproduce. The Beijing heat in the summer was a constant challenge during filming. Temperatures reached over 35 degrees Celsius during much of the July and August production. For Jaden Smith, who was doing fight scenes and intense physical training under this heat, it was a considerable Physical demand. The production medical team was present at all outdoor shoots, and hydration breaks were mandatory. Jackie Chan, accustomed to extreme physical conditions after decades of dangerous filming, handled the heat with the equanimity of someone who has been through much worse situations. But Chan was also in a different position in this film, less physically demanding than his usual action roles, more emotionally demanding. He spent much of the breaks in filming reviewing scenes with Zawat, discussing Mr. Han's internal choices, working on the character's psychology in a way he rarely had to do in his action films. Harold Zawat, the Norwegian director whose previous works included The Pink Panther tour, much lighter comedy, film was consciously operating outside his comfort zone with The Karate Kid. He acknowledged this in interviews, and also acknowledged that the challenge was what drew him to the project. Directing Jackie Chan as a dramatic actor, extracting vulnerability from an action icon, capturing the relationship between two characters from completely different cultures, that was real directing work, not just coordination of action sequences. Zawat has a specific merit that is rarely credited to him. He let China be China. Many American directors filming abroad tend to treat the environment as an exotic backdrop, something that exists to make the American protagonist seem more interesting by contrast. Zawat resisted this. China in The Karate Kid is not exoticism. It is a real place where real people live, love, suffer, and rejoice. Chinese culture in the film is treated with genuine respect, and that translates into something the Chinese audience recognized and valued when the film premiered in China. In July 2010, it was received with an enthusiasm that exceeded all projections. But before hitting the box office, there were still months of post-production, a soundtrack to compose, and a cultural battle that no one had predicted. The world was about to discover that the boy in the movie could also sing. The movie starts with a suitcase, not with a fight, not with an action scene, not with exciting music, with a suitcase being closed in a Detroit bedroom. And in that simple image, the film is already saying everything it needs to say about what is about to happen to Dre Parker. A closed suitcase is a life that is going to be left behind. Dre is 12 years old and lives in a modest apartment in Wimfeth, in Wimsend. In that simple image, and in that simple image, the film is already saying everything, is saying everything. Film is already saying everything it needs to say about what is about to happen to Dre Parker. A closed suitcase is a life that is going to be left behind. Dre is 12 years old and lives in a modest apartment in Wimsett, Detroit, with his mother, Sherry. The city appears briefly, but with affection Dre knows. Friends he has, a life that, as simple as it is his. There is a friend named Moloch with whom he plays video games. There is a neighborhood he knows by heart. There is a security in the ordinary that we only notice when we lose it. Sherry Parker works as a technician in a car factory and was transferred to a new unit in Beijing. The news arrived for Dre as a decision already made, not as a conversation, not as a possibility, but as a fait accompli. They are going. In a few weeks, Taraji P. Henson plays this scene with special care. Sherry is not insensitive to her son's pain. She knows what she is asking of him, but she also has no choice, or at least no choice she can clearly see at that moment. It's the job, it's financial security, it's the future of both. Henson finds in this tension between the love for the decision she makes and the guilt for the cost. She imposes the humanity of the character, and Jaden Smith finds in this same tension the humanity of Dre. The flight to Beijing is shown briefly, but with a detail worth noting. While Sherry sleeps, Dre stays awake, looking out the plane window into the darkness outside. It's a literal and symbolic moment of transition. He's between two worlds, leaving one, not yet entering the other, and the only place he occupies is this suspended space between sleep and nothingness. The arrival in Beijing is a carefully constructed shock. Harold Zwart films the city from Dre's point of view, that is, from the point of view of someone who has never seen anything like it. Beijing's streets are wide, bustling, chaotic in a rhythm that is different from American chaos. The apartment blocks are immense, uniform, stacked on the horizon. The signs are in Mandarin. People speak fast in a language that has no relation to anything Dre has ever heard. The smells are different. The sounds are different. Even the scale of things seems different. The apartment where Dre and Sherry are going to live is functional and empty. It's the kind of space that has no memory, yet nothing on the walls yet. No personal objects scattered, no mark that someone has already lived there. It's a space that needs to be built from scratch. Dre looks out the window and sees Beijing. Spreading out as far as the eye can see, there is nothing familiar. Absolutely nothing. It's in this total vulnerability that he meets Mei Ying, in the park in front of the apartment complex. Dre sees a girl playing the violin under a tree. She plays with a concentration and skill that stop him in his tracks. He doesn't understand a word she says when she notices she's being watched and smiles. But he doesn't need to understand. There is a language in the smile that is universal. Maine is presented with genuine kindness by the film. She isn't just the protagonist's love interest. She is a person with her own story, her own dreams, her own pressures. The daughter of demanding parents who wanted to focus on her studies in the violin. Maine lives under a weight of expectations that the film will explore later. But in this first meeting in the park, she is simply a curious girl who meets an equally curious boy, and the two communicate through the little they have in common, which for now is almost nothing. It's also in the park that Dre meets Cheng. Cheng is with a group of friends when he sees Dre trying to talk to Maine. Cheng's reaction isn't immediate or obvious. There is a moment when you still don't know exactly what is coming. And then it comes. Cheng says something in Mandarin that Dre doesn't understand, but whose tone is unmistakable. Dre answers in English, which makes everything worse. And before anything can be resolved with words, Cheng knocks Dre to the ground with a brutal efficiency that is almost casual. For Dre, who has no martial arts training, it's the first time he understands viscerally how much he doesn't know. It's not just that Cheng is stronger, it's that Cheng uses his body in a way Dre has never seen. It's fluid, precise, and completely beyond anything Dre can do. He gets up from the floor without being able to respond. This humiliation establishes the central dynamic of the first act. Dre in a city he doesn't understand, with no friends, no protection, with a bully who seems to have decided for reasons Dre doesn't comprehend that he is a target. Going to school every day means passing by Cheng and his group. Going to the park means risking another confrontation. Any exit from the apartment is a negotiation with fear. School appears as another space of disorientation. The classes are in Mandarin. The classmates are curious but distant. There is a scene in a class where the teacher asks a question and Dre, who obviously didn't understand anything, instinctively raises his hand, perhaps out of habit, perhaps out of an impulse not to seem completely low stand when the teacher gives him the floor. He has nothing. The silence that follows is not cruel, but it is devastating. It's at this school that Dre begins to learn some fragments of Mandarin not in a classroom, but from Maine in stolen conversations in the hallways. These scenes have a lightness that balances the weight of the rest of the first act. That to communicate with a mixture of broken Mandarin, English without response, and gestural mimicry that is genuinely funny without being forced. The school trip to the Forbidden City is one of the most beautiful sequences of the first act. Both visually and emotionally, the Forbidden City is filmed with a reverence that doesn't feel touristy. The rows of students walking through the immense courtyards, the red walls and golden roofs curving above them, the bronze lion statues at the gate, everything has a scale that makes any human being look small. And Dre, who is feeling small anyway, looks at it all with a mixture of wonder and melancholy. It's during this trip that the bucket incident happens. Cheng, taking advantage of a moment when Dre is alone in one of the courtyards, throws a bucket of dirty water on him in front of an audience of classmates. The humiliation is calculated. It's not impulse. It's theater. Cheng wants everyone to see. He wants Dre to stand there, drenched and without reaction, while the others laugh. Dre doesn't stand still. He tries to fight back. Not because he has any chance of winning, he knows he doesn't, but because there is a line that, even in a moment of fear, he cannot cross. To stand still and absorb that in silence would be a way of disappearing. And Dre, for all he lost, still refuses to disappear. The result is predictable. Cheng and his friends knock him down again, this time with more force and in public. Dre arrives home with dirty clothes, bruises, and an expression Sherry doesn't know how to read. He doesn't tell what happened in detail, but she sees. This is the lowest point of the first act. Dre is completely isolated, physically vulnerable, emotionally drained, and with no clear perspective for change. China is not becoming more familiar. Cheng is not backing down. And his mother, as much as she loves him, has no way to protect him from the problems he faces outside the apartment. It's at this exact point of silent despair that the film places in Dre's path a man he has barely noticed until now, the building's janitor, that quiet gentleman who appears occasionally in the hallways, who fixes faucets, who carries toolboxes, who watches everything with eyes that see more than he lets on. Mr. Han. The first time. Trey Parker sees Mr. Han Farelner as the silent janitor who passes through the hallways, but as someone who truly exists on a night when he was about to make a huge mistake. Dre had planned to take revenge on Cheng with a bucket of paint in an alley near the school. The plan was as ill-conceived as it seems. 12-year-old boy with no martial arts training, trying to take revenge on a kung fu group that has knocked him to the ground multiple times. But despair doesn't calculate probabilities. Despair simply acts. Before the plan could be executed, Mr. Han appears. Not dramatically, not with a memorable entrance. He's simply there, in the way, with that quiet manner of someone who has seen a lot and is no longer surprised by anything. He diverts Dre from the imminent confrontation with Cheng and his friends and, When the boys appear anyway, something changes in the air. Han positions himself between Dre and the aggressors, and then, in a movement sequence that lasts less than 2 minutes, Mr. Han dismantles each of Cheng's boys without looking like he's trying. There is no excessive violence, there is no blood, there is no brutality. There is only a precision so absolute that it seems almost poetic. Each boy who advances finds his own momentum being redirected against himself. It's kung fu in the purest sense, not force against force, but harmony that transforms the adversary's attack into the adversary's fall. Dre stands there watching with his mouth open. Han finishes the demonstration, adjusts his own jacket as if nothing had happened, looks at Cheng and says, with a calm that is more threatening than any shout could be, that this should not continue. Cheng backs down, not because he is convinced, but because he is, for the first time, in the face of something he doesn't know how to deal with. For Dre, that moment is a revelation. The building's janitor is a master. What follows is a negotiation between Dre and Han that has a comedic quality but is grounded in something real. Dre wants Han to teach him. Han doesn't want to teach anyone. He has his reasons for that. Reasons the film will reveal gradually, but in the immediate, his resistance is genuine. He isn't being modest. He is being honest about where he is emotionally. But Dre is persistent in the way only children manage to be persistent, without shame, without calculating if it's appropriate to insist, simply insisting because he needs to. Han gives in, with conditions. The condition is that they go to Master Li's dojo, Cheng's instructor, to ask that the attacks stop. Han believes that conflict should be resolved with words before being resolved with the body. This scene in the dojo is revealing for several reasons. Master Li is immediately established as someone who uses martial arts not as a growth path, but as a tool of domination. When Han asks that the attacks on Dre cease, Li responds with condescension and proposes a tournament if Dre wants respect. Let him come to the tournament and earn respect on the mat. Han didn't want this, but Dre accepts before Han can refuse, and so the training begins. The first session starts in a way Dre did not expect at all. Han points to Dre's jacket on the floor, where Dre threw it upon, entering, and says simply, "Pick up the jacket, Dre." Picks it up, put it on, Dre puts it on, take it off, Dre takes it off, throw it on the floor. Dre throws it, pick it up, and this continues. Pick up, put on, take off, throw, over and over and over. Dre's expression goes through confusion, irritation, growing frustration, and eventually a rage he can no longer contain. He stops in the middle of a repetition, throws the jacket on the floor with force, and says this is not training, that Han is playing with him, that he came here to learn how to defend himself, not to keep picking up clothes from the floor like an idiot. Han hears all this with patience. And then he does a simple thing. He asks Dre to try to hit him. Dre throws a punch. Han deflects and uses Dre's own arm to redirect the blow. Dre tries again, with more rage. Han deflects again, but this time Dre notices something. The movement Han used to deflect. It's familiar. It's exactly the same movement pattern he was repeating with the jacket. The jacket was not housework, disguised as training. It was the training, each repetition of picking up, putting on, taking off and throwing the jacket programmed into Dre's body, the fundamental defense movements of the style Han teaches. Muscle memory was being built without Dre knowing. And now that he knows, the repetitions that seemed absurd suddenly make a sense that goes beyond martial technique. Because Han is not teaching Dre just how to block punches. He is teaching that every fall has a rising, that the jacket on the floor can always be picked back up, that the position of vulnerability being on the floor, being knocked down is not the final state. It's just a temporary state that requires the right response. You stoop, you pick up, and you rise. This philosophy runs through the whole film in a way that only becomes completely clear at the end, when this same technique saves Dre in the tournament. But it also runs through the relationship between Dre and Han at a level that is not martial. They are both, each in their own way, on the floor. And what Han is teaching Dre is the same as what Dre, without realizing it, will teach Han. That you can get up. The training evolves over the following days in a progression that the film shows. With a generosity of time, there is no quick montage cut that compresses weeks into 30 seconds with upbeat music. There are real training scenes, with Jaden Smith's real fatigue visible on camera, with the errors and repetitions and moments of genuine progress. One of the most memorable training sequences happens in a courtyard while it rains. Han asks Dre to imitate the movements of a cobra that is on a nearby rock, the way the animal moves. The undulation of the body, the way it raises its head before attacking. Dre looks at the cobra with a mixture of disgust and perplexity, but he tries. And in the process of trying to imitate an animal that moves in a completely non-human way, something in Dre's body begins to lose inner rigidity he didn't even know he carried begins to give way. It's in this sequence that it becomes clear that Han is teaching Kung Fu in the most philosophical sense of the word. Kung Fu is not a collection of combat techniques. It's a way of moving the body in harmony with the principles of the natural world. The cobra doesn't think about attacking. It simply is a cobra. And when Dre learns to be the movement instead of thinking about the movement, something changes in the quality of what he does. The journey to the Wudang Mountains is the high point. Of the training period, Han takes Dre there as part of the training, not to teach a specific technique, but to show where what he teaches comes from. In the mountains, there is a woman who practices Kung Fu on the edge of a precipice, in slow and hypnotic movements that seem more dance than martial art. Around her, snakes emerge from the cracks in the rocks and follow her in movement, as if they were responding to her. Dre watches this with a silence that is different from all previous silences. It's not the silence of confusion. It's the silence of someone who is seeing something for the first time that has no word yet. Han explains that Kung Fu exists in everything, not just in fights, in the way you pick up a spoon, in the way you breathe, in the way you decide to get up when you're down. Kung Fu is attention, it's presence. It's the refusal to let the world happen to you passively. And then comes the healing scene. After a particularly intense training session in which Dre accumulates bruises and deep muscle pains, Han practices on him a traditional Chinese medicine technique called cupping therapy, or, as it is known in Brazil, ventosis, or fire cupping. These are heated glass cups applied to the skin, creating suction that stimulates circulation and relieves deep muscle pain. The scene is filmed with an almost documentary, Delicus Horn performs the procedure with the same precision and care with which he does everything. And the relief on Dre's face is immediate. It's a moment of physical care. That is also emotional care. Han is treating Dre's body, but in doing so, he is saying something he would never say out loud. I care about you. You are not alone here. The training is transforming Dre, but what no one has seen yet, neither Dre nor the audience, is how much the training is also transforming Han. And this transformation will arrive in a moment of rupture that no one on the production team knew exactly how to film. Until Jackie Chan arrived on set that day with an idea that changed the whole scene. There is a day on the calendar that Mr. Hunt cannot face. The film doesn't announce this day with prior notice. There is no dialogue explaining what is coming. What happens is that Dre shows up for training one morning and Han is not there. The courtyard is empty. The door of the shed where Han works is ajar. And from inside comes a sound that Dre doesn't recognize immediately, a low, rhythmic, heavy sound. The sound of something being methodically destroyed. Dre enters. What he sees is one of the most disturbing and at the same time most human images in the entire film. Mr. Han is alone in the center of the shed, wearing a stained garment with a bottle of drink by his side. In front of him is a Koran old Volkswagen, Sirocco, partially dismantled, which Han has clearly kept there for a long time. And Han is hitting this car, with his hands, with tools, with the weight of his own body, not with uncontrolled rage that would be easier to watch, with a dissociative precision that is much worse, as if each blow were a ritual, as if he were doing this because he has no choice. Dre retreats, tries to leave without being seen. But Han notices him, and in a moment of exposure that clearly was not intentional, Han looks at the boy, and in his expression you see a shame so deep it hurts. It isn't the shame of being caught doing something wrong. It's the shame of being seen in a place where you don't want to be seen by anyone, the darkest place in yourself. Jackie Chan filmed this scene in a state of concentration that the entire crew noticed. Harold Zwart reported that when Chan arrived on set that day, he asked for a few minutes alone before rolling. He stayed in the shed, in silence, looking at the car. When the cameras started rolling, what Chan did didn't follow exactly what was in the script. The script described the movements, Han's state, the sequence of events. But the quality of what Chan brought, the way he held his body, the way exhaustion and grief lived simultaneously in his posture, that came from a place that wasn't written on any page. Jort made a smart decision. He didn't interrupt. He let the camera roll. What followed is the central revelation of Han's character, and it's the scene that transforms the film from a youth martial arts drama into something genuinely moving. Han had a family, a wife, a 10-year-old son, and on a rainy day, in a car's car, the Sirocco he was driving with the two when the accident happened. The details are left purposely vague by the film. There is no flashback. There is no cinematic reconstruction of the accident. There is only Han in a shed, and the consequences of what happened living in every inch of his body. His wife and son died. Han survived, and every year, on the anniversary of that day, Han comes to the shed and does what you saw. He destroys the car, piece by piece, blow by blow, in a ritual of punishment and grief that is at once completely irrational and completely understandable. Because the car exists, and the family no longer exists, and he needs to do something with the weight of that, which doesn't fit inside a normal human body. That is why Han didn't want to teach Dredd, not because he didn't have the skill to teach, not because he didn't care, but because teaching someone is an act of hope. It's saying that there is a future worth being prepared for. And Han, for years, couldn't believe in that. For him, time had stopped on that rainy day. Everything. After that was just the movements of a life that continued without a clear reason. Dre doesn't leave the shed. This is important. The instinctive reaction of any child would be to retreat before an adult in this state, especially an adult you've known for a short time, in a context where you have no idea how to help. But Dre stays. Perhaps because he himself knows, in his own way, what it's like to wake up in a world different from what you expected. The displacement he feels in Beijing is not comparable to Han's loss, but it is a loss, and Dre can recognize pain even without understanding the full story behind it. What follows between the two is one of the most economically written dialogue sequences in the film. Dre asks about the car. Han responds with fragments, not a full explanation, but enough. Dre listens without trying to fix anything, without offering solutions, without saying the empty phrases adults say to children when they don't know what to say about pain. He simply listens, and then asks if Han wants to continue destroying the car. Han looks at him, and then, in a gesture that says more than any dialogue, Han hands a tool to Dre. The two finish dismantling the car together. It's a scene that works at multiple levels simultaneously. At the most literal level, it's two characters destroying a vehicle. At the emotional level, it's a man being helped to carry a weight he had been carrying alone for years, not because the weight disappears, but because there is another hand holding on for a moment. And at the symbolic level, it's the moment when the relationship between Han and Dre stops being master and apprentice and becomes something closer to family. Jackie Chan stated in interviews that this was the most difficult scene he had ever filmed in his entire career, not because of the physical challenge. Chan has broken bones in much more extreme situations, but because of the emotional challenge of reaching a place of such complete vulnerability in front of a camera. Chan grew up in a Hong Kong action cinema system where masculinity was demonstrated through physical invulnerability. Crying in a scene, showing weakness, letting grief appear without filter. That was something his cinematic training for decades had not required, and he did it with an authenticity that most people didn't expect from Jackie Chan. The Jackie Chan of car chases, of physical jokes, of the smile that never fades. This Chan does not smile in this scene. This Chan is on the floor, in the truest sense possible, and the camera observes him without judgment. The scene had an immediate impact on the way Jaden Smith played the rest of the film. Jaden reported in interviews that working with Chan in this sequence was the turning point in his understanding of what he was doing. Before that, he was committed to the role training, learning the scenes, delivering what was asked. But after watching Chan reach that place in a camera scene, something changed in the seriousness with which Jaden faced the remaining emotional scenes. Han's grief also explains a detail of the script that could pass unnoticed on a first viewing. The reason why Han fixes things. He is the building's janitor. He fixes faucets, doors, plumbing, but the word in Mandarin for fixing to repair something that is broken carries a philosophical resonance that the script uses consciously. Han spent years trying to fix the world around him because he couldn't fix the only hole that really mattered, the absence of his family. And then Dre appears in his life, broken in his own way. Scared, displaced Han cannot resist the urge to try to fix that too. What begins as reluctance becomes, without Han realizing it immediately, a reason. There is a scene after the shed in which Dre writes a note in Mandarin with Main's help and slides it under Han's door. It's a small scene, just a few seconds long, that the film presents almost in passing. But what Dre wrote, translated, is essentially an apology for coming in at the wrong time and a thank you for continuing to teach anyway. Han reads the note alone in the apartment. The camera observes Chan's face as he reads, and you see an expression that lasts maybe 3 seconds, something that seems terrible and wonderful at the same time. It looks like a man who was frozen, starting slowly to thaw. It isn't healing. Healing doesn't happen like that in a 3-second scene, but it's a beginning, and beginnings, as Han will teach Dre in a different way soon, are all that any of us really have. Training restarts the next day, but nothing between them is the same as before. They both know now what each one is carrying, and there is a different dignity in the way they treat each other after that knot. From master to apprentice, not from adult to child, but from two. People who have decided, without ceremony and without great declarations, that they are going to continue together on the path. Wherever that path leads, there is something that the 2010 Karate Kid does that many youth adventure films don't do. It takes romance seriously, not as a decoration. Not as the mandatory subplot that exists, because every Kumanov-age film needs a love interest for the protagonist. The relationship between Dre Parker and Maine has real emotional weight in the film, has real consequences for both characters, and says something real about what happens when two completely different worlds meet in a 12-year-old person. Maine, played by Wen Han, is introduced playing the violin in a park, and that presentation choice is not accidental. Music is the first language that Dre and Mei share before broken English, before even more broken Mandarin. Before any word works between them, there is music. Dre stops in his tracks when he hears her play, not because he's trying to impress someone, because he genuinely can't keep walking. The violin that Wen Han plays in that scene is real. This is not an actress with hands positioned strategically while another person plays off camera. Wen Han was a real musician. She studied violin with a seriousness that her parents encouraged, and this real background was directly incorporated into Main's character. The film was not asking her to pretend to be something she wasn't. It was asking her to be, on screen, what she already was in life. That authenticity appears in the scene. The construction of the romance between Dre and Mei follows a logic that is much more credible than usual in films for this audience. They don't fall in love over a grand dramatic declaration. They get closer little by little, in small moments, an exchange of glances at school, an improvised Mandarin lesson in a hallway, a shared smile over the language barrier that still separates them. The connection between them is built on the texture of the ordinary, in the kind of affection that is born not from grandiose gestures but from consistent attention. The lantern festival, the Shishi festival in the film, is where this construction culminates. The festival scene is visually one of the most beautiful in the whole film. lighted paper lanterns floating in the dark Beijing sky. A festive crowd around, and Dre and Maine finding within all this movement a pocket of quiet just for them. It's the kind of scene that in a smaller film could easily slip into cheap sentimentalism, too beautiful photography, too loud music, emotion signaled with excessive force. The Karate Kid does not make that mistake. The scene is contained. The kiss between Dre and Maine is brief, almost timid, the way a first kiss between 12-year-old children really is. There is no music that rheezes dramatically. There is no camera spinning around the two. There are just two boys at a lantern festival, with the sky full of light above them, doing something scary and wonderful at the same time. And then the consequences appear. Because Maine doesn't exist in a vacuum. She has parents, and her parents have plans. Maine's mother and father are invested in a way the film portrays without judgment, but also without They want their daughter to have a guaranteed future, that her studies are up to date, that her music is developed with seriousness, that distractions are minimized. And an American boy newly arrived in Beijing, who barely speaks Mandarin and who keeps inviting Maine to go out in the middle of the afternoon when she should be studying, is the kind of distraction they definitely don't approve of. The scene in which Dre convinces Maine to skip an afternoon of study to spend time with Heyman, the subsequent scene in which her parents find out, is one of the most honestly uncomfortable moments in the film. Because the film doesn't present Maine's parents as villains. They are not cruel people preventing a true love with unjustified authoritarianism. They are parents concerned about the future of a daughter who has real talent and real opportunities that can be wasted by impulsive teenage choices. Dre understands this, or begins to understand. When he faces Maine's father in a conversation, he doesn't have the vocabulary in Mandarin to have properly. The father speaks. Dre doesn't understand half the words, but he understands the tone. And the tone says, "You are on the wrong path." What Dre does next is one of the character's most mature choices in the entire film. He doesn't insist. He doesn't try to convince Maine that her parents are wrong. He doesn't put her in the position of choosing between him and her family. He retreats not because he gave up on his feelings, but because he understood that forcing someone to choose when the choice can hurt is a form of selfishness he doesn't want to practice. Mei Ying, for her part, doesn't disappear from the film. After that, she remains present in the school hallways, in the moments when she crosses paths with Dre, but with a distance that is painful exactly because they both know why it exists. This unresolved tension has a much more realistic quality than what most young adult films present. Real life is like that. Feelings that continue to exist even when circumstances don't allow them to be fully lived. Maine's arc closes satisfactorily. In the final tournament, she appears in the stands to watch Dre fight against her parents' wishes, because there is a loyalty she cannot completely abandon. And when Dre wins, the look they exchange from the mat to the stands contains all the weight of what happened between them without needing a single word. It's a romance ending. That is not properly an ending. It's a tacit promise that the story hasn't finished, only paused. Which is honestly the most faithful form of how relationships work at this age. When Han delivered a performance that many critics underlined as a positive surprise of the film. She had no significant previous cinematic experience, and there are moments in which there appears one or two scenes where the delivery is a bit more mechanical than the rest of her work. But in most of her scenes, especially the park scenes and the festival sequence. She has a genuine presence that doesn't seem constructed, and there is a detail in the script related to Maine that deserves specific attention. The audition for the Performing Arts Music School. Mei Ying is trying to pass an audition for a prestigious music school, the kind of achievement that would define the next years of her life. The pressure she carries about this is real and constant in the film, and the scene in which she finally auditions playing Chopin on the violin in a room of stern teachers while the stakes of all her musical training hang over her is filmed with a tension that rivals any fight scene in the film. The film uses Chopin's music with precision here. The nocturne chosen for the scene has a quality that is simultaneously delicate and structurally firm as Mayen needs to be at that moment. She begins with visible nervousness. There is a hesitation in the first few measures, and then something gives and she simply plays. The camera stays on her face as this happens, and when Wen-han does something few young actresses manage, she makes you feel that the music is coming from inside her, not from an instrument in her hands. Dre is outside the room during the audition, unable to do anything except wait and want her to do well. This scene, where he waits while she auditions, is one of the most quietly poetic moments in the film, because it's a boy who came to Beijing with nothing, learned what it is to want the best for another person without being able to control the outcome, and is here practicing exactly that. There is no shown result of the audition in this scene. The film leaves it open on purpose. What matters is not whether she passed or not. What matters is that she played, and sometimes playing is all that is asked of you. The tournament arrives as an inevitability. Ever since the scene in Master Lee's dojo, when Dre accepted the challenge before Han could refuse, the tournament was the horizon toward which everything in the film moved. Each training session, each humiliation in the streets of Beijing, each conversation between Dre and Han at the edge of the track, everything was being built to culminate in that gym, on that mat, in that moment when Dre Parker would need to be, in front of everyone, what he had learned to be. But the tournament doesn't start with Dre. It starts with a decision by Han in the weeks leading up to the competition. Han observes Dre's progress with a mixture of genuine pride and a concern. He doesn't fully verbalize. Dre has improved extraordinarily. The muscle memory built with the jacket is integrated into his body. His movements have fluidity. His posture has changed in a way that goes beyond martial arts and says something about how he relates to the space around him. He is no longer the boy who arrived in the courtyard as if he were apologizing for existing. But Han knows that what they will find in the tournament is not a fair challenge. Master Lee is not training champions. He is manufacturing soldiers. The difference is fundamental. A champion learns to win within the rules, because the rules reflect a philosophy. A soldier learns to destroy, because destroying is the goal. Lee teaches his students that mercy is weakness, that compassion is vulnerability, that victory justifies any means. That is not Kung Fit's the use of Kung Fu as weaponry. Han explains this to Dre in one of the most direct conversations the two have in the film. Not with alarm, not with an attempt to dissuade him from competing, but with honesty about what to expect. Lee's students are going to try to hurt Dre, not win hurt. And Dre needs to be prepared not only for the physical fight, but for the attempt to break what is inside him. Dre hears this and responds with something simple. He isn't going to the tournament to prove anything to Cheng. He's going to prove something to himself. That distinction is the heart of the film's final second act. The tournament is held in a Beijing sports gym with stands full of families and fans. The production filmed this sequence with real extras and with a genuine competition energy that the camera captures well. The gym has that specific noise of a youth sports arena, part enthusiasm, part collective nervousness, the sound of hundreds of people who came to see their children, siblings, and friends compete. DRE arrives with Han at his side. And for the first time in the film, you notice that Dre isn't looking around with that anxiety of someone who doesn't know where he fits in. He is looking forward. The tournament starts with the preliminary rounds, and the film presents them with narrative intelligence. Not every fight is shown in exhaustive detail. Dre's first victories are presented with economy enough to establish that he is competing for real, that the training worked, that the movements learned in the courtyard with the jacket are coming out of his body with a naturalness that surprises even the judges. But the most important thing in the early rounds isn't Dre, it's the way Master Lee's students compete. Lee is positioned at the edge of the mat in each of his students' fights, and what you see in that position says everything about who he is. He doesn't encourage. He instructs with the coldness of an engineer calibrating a machine. When a student wins, there is no celebration. There is only the next command. Lee isn't teaching children. He is using children as instruments of his need to dominate. Cheng competes with brutal efficiency. He is technically superior to almost all the opponents he faces in the early rounds, and the camera records this without romanticism. Chang is good, very good. But there is something in his eyes during the fights that isn't the concentration of an athlete. It's the tension of someone carrying out an order. Jen Wei Wong, who plays Cheng, delivers subtle nuances in these tournament scenes that deserve more recognition than they generally receive. There is a moment between two fights when Cheng looks at Dre in the stands, and what passes across his expression isn't hatred. It's something more complicated almost, a recognition. As if in another context, in a world where Master Lee didn't exist, Cheng and Dre could have been something else to each other. The tournament progresses. Dre keeps winning, and as he advances through the rounds, the gym starts to pay attention to him in a different way. In the beginning, it was curiosity, the American boy who appeared out of nowhere. Now it's burgeoning respect. The other competitors watch him closely. There are murmurs in the stands. Han watches all this with an expression that changes very gradually through the rounds. In the beginning, there is still a residual tension, the fear of someone who is invested in someone and doesn't want to see that person destroyed. But as the rounds pass, the tension gives way to something Han clearly wasn't expecting to feel. Pride, a father's pride. It's strange that this is surprising, given everything we know about Han at this point. But it's precisely because we know. The story of the lost son that Han's pride here has a specific weight. He isn't just seeing a student win. He is experiencing something life took from him and that he didn't believe he would experience again. And then the most brutal turning point of the film happens. Dre is in the semi-finals. The opponent he faces is Liang, another student of Lee's. Different from Cheng, chosen specifically by Lee for this match. And Lee, at the edge of the mat, gives an instruction that shouldn't be given in a sports tournament. Injure the leg. Liang executes the instruction with a precision that is horrible precisely because it is so deliberate. In one of the exchanges of blows, he applies a specific technique to Dre's knee knot, a fighting blow, an application of force designed to cause damage. The referee was positioned at the wrong angle. The action passes. Dre falls. The pain is immediate and intense. And Jaden Smith doesn't need to fake much here. The expression on his face as he tries to get up and can't has the quality of someone feeling something real. The fight is stopped. Han runs to the mat. Sherry, in the stands, stands up. The gym falls silent. Liang receives the victory by the opponent's inability to continue. At the edge of the mat, Li watches with the cold satisfaction of someone who saw the plan work. Cheng, who is nearby, looks at Dre on the floor and for a moment, a brief moment, but presents something in his face wavers. It isn't guilt. It's something more diffuse. A discomfort that doesn't know its own name. Dre is taken backstage with a severely bruised knee. Event doctors examine him. The immediate verdict is that he shouldn't continue, that the risk of permanent damage isn't worth a youth tournament trophy. Sherry agrees. She looks at her son and says, with that mixture of fear and love that Taraji P. Henson carries so well throughout the film, you don't need to continue. You already proved what you needed to prove. That is enough. Dre looks at his mother. Then he looks at Han, and Han, who throughout the film taught that getting up from the ground is a choice, that the jacket can always be picked back up, that the position of vulnerability isn't permanent. Han stays silent, because this decision isn't his. It can't be. It's Dre's, and Dre hasn't made the decision yet. He is lying on a stretcher backstage at a gym in Beijing, with his knee throbbing, with his mother holding his hand, with the man who became the most important figure in his life looking at him in silence. What happens next will depend entirely on what exists inside this boy, which is, at its core, the question the whole film was asking from the very first scene. Dre. Parker asks to continue, not with a speech, not with a dramatic declaration that announces to the world what he is feeling. He simply looks at Han and says he needs to go back to the mat, that he cannot finish this way. That finishing like this, lying on a stretcher while someone who used a forbidden technique to knock him down receives the trophy, be a form of defeat that has nothing to do with the tournament. Sherry tries to argue. Doctors recommend against it. Common sense says no. Han looks at Dre for a long moment. And then he does something no doctor in the gym would approve of. He asks for the cupping glass. The cupping therapy scene backstage at the tournament is a direct echo of the healing scene earlier in the film, but with a different urgency. This time it isn't training, recovery, it's preparation for battle. Han works on Dre's legs with total concentration, and when he finished, there is a 30-second sequence in which the camera simply observes Dre's face as he decides if he can get up. He can. Dre's entrance back into the gym for the final is one of the best calibrated moments of the film from the standpoint of emotional construction. The gym was waiting for the end. It was waiting for the tournament to follow without the American boy. And when Dre reappears at the mat entrance limping, visibly hurt, but standing, the silence that falls over the gym has a specific quality. It isn't the silence of surprise. It's the silence of recognition. All that gym full of people who came to watch sports competition is, at that moment, seeing something different. It's seeing a choice dot in the stands, Maine stands up at the edge of the opposite mat. Master Lee watches with an expression that for the first time in the film isn't of complete control. There is something there, not exactly fear, but a recalibration. The plan was to end the threat of Dre in the semi-finals. The plan failed. Chang is on the center mat, waiting. And here the film makes an interesting choice. It doesn't cut to Cheng's face with declared villainy. It cuts to Cheng's face with complexity. He is looking at Dre, limping toward the mat, and what you read in Zhenwei Wang's expression isn't satisfaction. It's an internal tension the character doesn't know how to resolve within the system in which he was raised. The referees check Dre. He confirms he can continue. The fight begins. What Harold Zwart and fight choreographer Yuan Whoopingus. The same Yuan whooping of Matrix and Kill Bill did with the final fight is notable. They didn't create an impossible action sequence where a boy with a knee injury suddenly becomes invincible. Dre's physical limitation is maintained throughout the fight. He is slower. He is clearly feeling pain. There are moments when you see in Jaden Smith's body the cost of each movement. And yet he continues. The first exchanges of blows of the final are balanced in a way that surprises. Dre isn't winning easily, but he also isn't being destroyed. He is using exactly what Han taught: not force against force, but redirection, positioning, taking advantage of the opponent's momentum. Cheng is stronger and more agile, but Dre is smarter on the mat than anyone expected. The gym gradually wakes up to what is happening. There is an exchange in the middle of the fight in which Cheng knocks Dre down with a clean and legitimate blow. Dre falls. He touches the ground with his hands, and then, in a movement that is both a kung fu technique and a symbol of everything the film has been building, he picks up the jacket from the floor, metaphorically, but also literally. He uses his arms on the floor to propel himself back to standing with the same fluidity he practiced hundreds of times in Han's courtyard. Han, at the edge of the mat, closes his eyes for a second. The fight reaches the decisive moment with both competitors clearly at the limit. Cheng is physically and technically superior, but Dre has persisted in a way that is eroding the technical advantage. And then comes the moment the whole film was preparing for. Dre positions himself in the Cobra stance. The movement he learned watching the woman in the Wudang Mountains. The movement that imitates the undulation of the animal. The movement that seemed impossible and strange when Han first asked for it, and that now comes out of Dre's body as if it had always been there. He lifts one leg. He stands balanced on his good knee while the injured knee rises laterally. His arm goes up together. His posture opens, and for a second exactly like on the stone column in the Wudang Mountains, he is suspended in a balance that seems to defy physics and common sense. The gym catches its breath. Chang advances, and Dre goes down in a spinning kick that comes from the top of the elevated position and connects with Cheng's head with a precision and strength that carries all the weight of the training. The pain, the months in Beijing, of each time he was knocked down, of each time he got up. Cheng falls. The referee counts. Cheng doesn't get up before the count finishes. The gym explodes. But what happens next is the most important choice the film makes in its entire length. And it's the choice that separates this outcome from any generic martial arts movie outcome. The referees deliver the trophy to Dre. Sherry is in the stands celebrating. Han is at the edge of the mat with that expression we already know how to recognize. the gradual thawing of a man who has come back to feeling things he thought he had lost forever. And then Cheng gets up, not with anger, not with threat. He gets up slowly, looks at Dre, and does something masterly clearly never taught. He takes the trophy from the referees and, with a formal gesture that is at once acknowledged defeat and genuine respect, delivers the trophy to Dre with his own hands. It is an act of honor that comes from within, not from instruction. And in that moment, you completely understand what Cheng was. He wasn't bad. He was a boy who was molded by a system that used kung fu as a tool of domination, but who had never completely destroyed what was inside him that knew the difference between strength and brutality. What Lee built in Cheng was armor. What Dre simply, being Dre, simply continuing did was find the crack in the armor. Master Lee, at the edge of the mat, watches Cheng's gesture with a rigidity that doesn't hide defeat. He lost. Not the fight was technically lost on points. He lost something more important, the control over what he built. Cheng delivered the trophy because he wanted to, because he chose to, and Lee never taught students to choose only. To obey. That is Lee's ultimate defeat. Without a single punch, the camera passes by Han after the trophy is delivered. He is looking at Dre in the center of the mat with an expression that has no easy word in any language. It's the look of someone who had been on the floor for years, not on the gym mat, but on the deeper floor where people go when they lose what they love most, and who, in that noisy gym at a youth kung fu tournament in Beijing, found a reason to get up. Dre looks back. The two don't need words. They never needed much. The final scene of the tournament closes with Dre lifting the trophy not triumphantly, not with the closed fist of the winner who crushes the opponent, with the quiet gesture of someone who has reached where they needed to reach, and who knows, better than anyone, how much each step of the way costs. In the stands, may in smiles. In Beijing, where there was nothing 2 years ago, Dre Parker has a trophy, has a master, has a friend who became more than a friend, and has something no trophy can contain. He knows who he is. That is the tournament. That is the climax. That is what the film was building since the first suitcase closed in a Detroit bedroom. And it is enough. There is something that happens when a soundtrack truly works in a film. You don't realize you're being emotionally led. The music comes in, does its job, and what you feel seems to come from inside you, not from speakers. You only realize the quality of the work when you watch the same scene without sound and notice how much the emotion diminishes. The 2010 Karate Kid soundtrack. It's like that James Horner was the composer hired for the film's score, the film's orchestral score. Horner was, at that moment, in 2009 and 2010, one of the most celebrated and busiest composers in Hollywood. He had just delivered the Avatar score, James Cameron's film that broke every box office record in history until then. The Avatar score had been nominated for an Oscar. The whole world was talking about it. And then, Horner went to do the Karate Kid. This may seem like a step down in scale. It isn't. Horner was a composer who took every project with equal seriousness, regardless of commercial size. And the Karate Kid offered a specific challenge that clearly interested him, creating a sound identity that was simultaneously American and Chinese, honoring the musical tradition of both cultures without turning either of them into a caricature. What Horner built is a score that uses Western orchestral instrumentation as a bass strings, brass, percussion, but that carefully integrates elements of traditional Chinese music. The erhu, a traditional Chinese two-stringed bowed instrument that produces a sound that has no Western equivalent, appears at several moments in the score. It is an instrument of extraordinary emotional range, has a human voice quality that makes it hard not to be touched by it when used correctly. Horner uses it correctly, the film's main theme, which appears for the first time on Dre's arrival in Beijing and returns transformed at several key points in the narrative, combines this erhu sound with orchestral strings in a way that captures exactly what Dre is feeling, something strange and something beautiful at the same time, a mixture of disorientation and wonder that is the honest experience of encountering a completely new world in the training scenes. The music changes character. It becomes more rhythmic, more percussive, with influences from Chinese folk music that give the kung fu sequences an energy that is different from generic Hollywood action music. There are no distorted electric guitars announcing that this is an exciting training montage. There are drums and wood percussion that sound like part of the martial movement itself. The sequence in the Wudang Mountains has perhaps Horner's best work in the whole film. When the camera finds the woman practicing kung fu at the edge of the cliff, with the snakes moving around her, the music Horner placed in that scene has a daydream quality, quiet, hypnotic, with that erhu in the foreground creating a melody that seems to exist out of time. It's the music of a place that is connected to something older than anything Dre knew in Detroit. And then there's the scene in the Forbidden City with the elderly people practicing Tai Chi at dawn. The music there is almost non-just, a very soft sound texture that exists more as in rich silence than as a composition itself. Horner understood that there are moments when the best a composer can do is almost nothing, that the beauty of the scene speaks louder than any score. Horner passed away in June 2015, when the plane he himself was piloting crashed in California. He was 61 years old. The Karate Kid score remained part of a discography that included Titanic, Braveheart, Apollo 13, and A Beautiful Mind, and even in that extraordinary company. The quiet and sensitive work he did here deserves to be remembered, but the conversation about the music of the 2010 Karate Kid is impossible without talking about a song that was not composed by Horner and that had a life of its own completely separate from the film. Never Say Never. The song was recorded by Justin Bieber in partnership with Jaden Smith. In 2010, Justin Bieber was 16 years old and was the most explosive pop phenomenon of the moment. His first album, My World, had been released in 2009 and had made him a global star at a speed that the music industry rarely witnessed. The idea of putting Bieber and Jaden together in a song for the Karate Kid was, from a commercial point of view, one of the most obvious decisions the production made. But the result was better than anything purely commercial tends to be. Never Say Never is not just a film soundtrack song. It's a song about persistence that worked in multiple contexts about Dre's character in the film, about Bieber's own trajectory as a young artist who started with nothing and got where he got, about Jaden Smith navigating the weight of being the son of one of the world's biggest stars while trying to be seen as something beyond that. The song was released as a single months before the film's premiere and performed in the charts beyond any reasonable expectation. It reached number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the United States. It was certified platinum in multiple countries. The video, which interspersed scenes from the film with scenes of Bieber and Jaden, accumulated hundreds of millions of views. More important than the numbers, the song entered the culture. Never Say Never was used in contexts completely disconnected from the film in sports competitions, in stories of overcoming, in motivational videos. The lyrics, which talk about refusing the impossible and continuing when everything says to stop, had a universality that transcended the specific context of the Karate Kid. It was a message that worked for anyone in any difficult situation. For Jaden Smith, the song was a sort of introduction to the world of music. He was 12 years old when he recorded it, and the experience of working with Bieber in the studio clearly ignited something that stayed. Jaden continued in music after that, releasing his own material in the following years, and developing a musical, artistic identity that was completely different from his father's. In addition to Horner's score and Never Say Never, the film uses a selection of licensed songs that covers different emotional registers with efficiency. Jay Sean appears in the soundtrack with a pop lightness that matches the lighter scenes of the first act. AC/DC and Red Hot Chili Peppers appear in moments that need a more urgent energy. Lady Gaga and Gorillaz fill transition scenes with personality, but the most elegant musical choice in the film, and the most underrated, is the use of Chopin in Maine's audition scene. The Chopin nocturne that appears in this scene was not chosen randomly. Chopin was a 19th century Polish composer who wrote about displacement and longing. He lived much of his adult life away from his native Poland, in Paris, and the melancholy of the voluntary exile is in much of his music. Placing Chopin in Maine's auditioner, Chinese girl playing 19th century, European music in a context of pressure and expectation creates a layer of meaning the film doesn't explain because it doesn't need to. The music speaks. The 2010 Karate Kid soundtrack, considered as a whole, functions as an additional character in the film. It is not decoration, it is emotional narration. At each point where the script and direction need support to sustain the emotional weight of the scene, Horner's music and the soundtrack, supervisor's musical choices arrive with exactly what is necessary. Without one note too many. James Horner understood that restraint is a form of respect for the scene, for the actors, for the story being told. He didn't want people leaving the cinema thinking, what a beautiful soundtrack. He wanted them to leave feeling things they didn't know how to name completely. When that happens with film music, it's art. And in this film, it happened when The Karate Kid premiered in American theaters on June 11th, 2010. The film critic world arrived divided. It wasn't a division between those who loved and those who hated. It was a division more interesting and more honest than that. It was the division between critics who managed to evaluate the film for what it was and critics who could only evaluate it for what they expected it to be. And that distinction between seeing a film and seeing one's own expectations reflected in a film is one of the most fundamental questions of the film critic craft. Roger Ebert was one of the first high-rich critics to publish his review, and he did so with a generosity that surprised many people. Ebert gave the film 3.5 stars out of 4, a grade that, in Ebert's system, meant a clear recommendation. He wrote that the film was better than it needed to be and that Jaden Smith delivered a genuinely moving performance. Ebert was known for resisting the easy cynicism of critics who used negativity as a sign of sophistication. He believed that a well-executed film in its genre deserved to be recognized as such, regardless of what the genre was. The Karate Kid in Ebert's assessment, was a well-executed coming-of-age film. Simple as that. And Hornaday of the Washington Post was even more enthusiastic. She described Jaden Smith's performance as a revelationer. Strong word, especially in a context where there was so much skepticism about the young actor's presence in the role. Hornaday saw in Jaden's Dre an authenticity that wasn't a product of taught technique, but of something more instinctive and rare. She also highlighted Jackie Chan, underlining that Mr. Han was different from anything Chan had done before, and that the difference was for the better. Owen Gleiberman of Entertainment Weekly took a more cautious but still positive stance. He recognized the film's merits, the cinematography in China, the chemistry between the two leads, the emotional honesty of certain scenes, but had reservations about the length. At 2 hours and 24 minutes long, the 2010 Karate Kid is considerably longer than most films aimed at a juvenile audience, and Gleiberman felt there were at least 20 minutes that could have been cut without significant loss. It's not a criticism without basis. There are moments in the second act when the film's pace slows down more than the story demands, but there is also an opposite argument that the length is part of the film's philosophy, that a film about patience and discipline should not be in a hurry, that the slow scenes exist so you can feel the weight of the process, not just see its results. The consolidated rating on Rotten Tomatoes was 6 to 7%, which on the site scale means fresh, i.e., more approval than disapproval, but far from an enthusiastic consensus. The critical consensus published on the site described the film as a competent remake that lacks the magic of the original but benefits from strong performances and stunning locations. Metacritic, which aggregates reviews on a scale of 0 to 100, giving different weights to publications, recorded 61, which on the site's scale falls into the category of generally favorable reviews. But here is where the story gets interesting. The public disagreed with the critics quite clearly. CinemaScore, the American system that interviews spectators leaving premiere sessions and asks them to rate the film on a scale from A to F, gave the 2010 Karate Kid a grade of a not a minus. A. It's the highest possible grade. And in CinemaScore history, films that receive an A on premiere are consistently those where the audience feels that what they received exceeded what they expected. Exit polls showed specific data that Sony Pictures used extensively in subsequent marketing. 82% of viewers rated the film as excellent. Approval was consistently high among all tested demographic groups: teenagers, adults, seniors. It was one of those rare films that worked for entire families. At the same time, the contrast between the moderate critical reception and the massive audience approval sparked debate in the specialized press. Some critics read this as evidence that the film was emotionally manipulative, that it used popular entertainment techniques to create emotional responses that serious criticism should not endorse. Others read it as evidence that professional criticism was being too hard on a film that did what it set out to do extraordinarily well. The question of Jaden Smith's presence was, inevitably, a central part of the critical debate. For Jackie Chan, the 2010 Karate Kid represents a turning point in his American cinematic career. After decades of being seen almost exclusively as an action and comedy actor, Mr. Han demonstrated that Chan had a dramatic dimension that Hollywood had systematically ignored. The performance was recognized as the best of his English-language career by virtually all criticism that wasn't too skeptical to recognize it. For Jaden Smith, the film was the launch of an independent career that continued in directions few predicted. Jaden continued working in cinema, music, fashion, developing an artistic identity that was deliberately unconventional, clearly influenced by the level of exposure and experiences the 2010 Karate Kid provided. The gross film earned almost 9 times its production budget. It established an unproven young actor as a viable blockbuster lead. It revitalized the Karate Kid franchise after 16 years of inactivity on screen. It opened Sino-American co-production models that influenced how Hollywood approached the Chinese market in the following decade. And it did it all by being better than it needed to be. That is legacy. Every film has a central question. A question that exists at the heart of everything that motivates every scene. Every character choice, every script decision. If the film never formulates it explicitly out loud, the question of the 2010 Karate Kid is this: what is left of you when everything that was familiar disappears? It's a question that seems simple on the surface and gets more complex the more you think about it. Because what it's really asking is not about physical resistance or martial skill. It's asking about identity, about what we are when we are removed from the context that defines us, when language no longer works, when friends aren't there, when the neighborhood no longer exists, when even the music around sounds different. Who are you underneath all that? Dre Parker doesn't know the answer when the film starts. And part of the honesty of the film is that he doesn't fully know it when it ends. What he has at the end is not a complete answer. It's a direction. It's the feeling that the question doesn't need to be answered all at once, that the process of discovering who you are never really ends, and that the most important thing is not reaching the answer, but continuing to be honest about where you are on the path. This isn't an action movie message for children. It's philosophy. It's the kind of thing adults in therapy try to articulate after years of internal work. And it's in a kung fu film with a 12-year-old boy. The theme of displacement runs through the 2010 Karate Kid in a way that sets it apart from almost all other films in its category. It isn't just Dre who is displaced. He is displaced from the very future he imagined, trapped in a past he can't let go of. Mei Ying is displaced between the family's expectations and what she herself wants. Cheng is displaced from his own moral judgment, imprisoned in a system that uses his body without caring about his soul. The film doesn't condemn any of these displacements with a pointed finger. It presents them as human conditions, things that happen to real people who are trying to navigate worlds they don't fully control. And what unites all these characters, what creates the possibility of connection between them, is the mutual recognition of this condition. Han recognizes in Dre something of himself. Dre recognizes in Han something that has no name yet, but that feels familiar. Mei Ying recognizes us. Ingray, someone who sees her without the pressure of expectations that everyone around projects on her. This mutual recognition, this ability to see the other, not as a symbol of a problem, but as a complete person, with their own pains and desires, is what the film is teaching. Not the cobra position, not the spinning kick. The theme of discipline as a path versus discipline as a weapon is where the film is smartest and most political. Marcelli is a villain who never raises his own voice above a certain controlled temperature. He isn't sadistic in the spectacular sense. He is something more dangerous. He is a man who genuinely believes that what he does is correct, that hardening children, eliminating compassion, turning bodies into tools of domination, all of this serves a worldview he considers superior. Lee doesn't see students as human beings in formation. He sees them as control projects. Han is the exact antithesis of Lie. The discipline that Han teaches Dre doesn't produce obedience. It produces autonomy. The difference between the two masters is not technical, it's philosophical. Lee wants students who don't think. Han wants a student who eventually no longer needs him, and that is the final measure of any teaching relationship. Whether the master was satisfied with the dependence or with the independence of the print. In my imagination, the apprentice Han is satisfied with the independence. In the final tournament, Dre uses the Cobra position, the most advanced technique in the repertoire, without Han needing to instruct him. Han couldn't even, at that moment, from outside the mat. Dre is alone, with a hurt knee, with the whole gym watching, and he makes the right choice with his body, without waiting for an order, without waiting for permission. That is what Han was. Teaching with the jacket, since the first day. The theme of culture as dialogue and not as Shaka's, where the film is gentlest and perhaps most naive, but of a naivety that has value. The 2010 Karate Kid genuinely believes that cultures can meet with respect, that a boy from Detroit can learn from a master from Beijing, that China has things to teach the world that don't fit into any commercial transaction, that this learning goes in both directions because Han learns from Dre too, learns that there is a reason to continue, learns that the love he lost can find a new form without betraying the original. The film is idealistic about this. The real China in 2010 was more complicated than the Beijing that appears on the screen. The cultural tensions between Americans and Chinese in real life have layers that a family action film could not, and probably should not, try to solve. But idealization doesn't invalidate the value of the gesture. Sometimes cinema needs to show what could be before showing what is. And the idea that two people from opposite cultures can sit in a courtyard at dawn and teach something precious to each other, that idea is worth showing now. The comparison everyone wants to make, Karate Kid 2010 versus Karate Kid 1984, the original 1984, directed by John G. Avildsen, is a film that has a rare narrative economy. With little money and relatively unknown actors at the time, it created a coming-of-age story that entered the American cultural unconscious in a way that no sequel or remake managed to fully replicate. Pat Morita, as Mr. Miyagi, is one of the most beloved characters in American popular cinema history. Ralph Macchio, as Daniel LaRusso, has a vulnerability that is a product of his own inexperience as an actor at a time when that inexperience worked for. The character, the original, is leaner, simpler. It has a purity of purpose that the 2010 remake, with its 144,000 locations, its elaborate score, and its multiple themes, doesn't have in the same way. But the 2010 remake has other things the original doesn't have. It has an adult dimension of Los in Mr. Hunt's arc that the original didn't touch. It has a real China that no setting could replicate. It has a conversation about what it's like to be a foreigner in a completely different place that the original didn't need to have because Daniel LaRusso was in the United States. And it has Jackie Chan in a dramatic performance that, if evaluated only as a dramatic cinema performance without any context of who Chan is, would be considered extraordinary. The two films don't need to be in competition. They are products of different times, of different contexts, of different worlds. The original is a classic for reasons the remake didn't try to replicate. The remake is its own thing for reasons the original couldn't have. Saying the 2010 remake is better than the original is wrong. Saying the 2010 remake doesn't have comparable value is equally wrong. The honest verdict is this: the 2010 Karate Kid is a well-made film that operates within the conventions of its genre with intelligence, that honors the influences that inspired it without being a slave to them, that delivers performances, especially from Jackie Chan, that go far beyond what the context required, and that carries a genuine emotion that resists time better than its 67% on Rotten Tomatoes suggests. It's a film that deserved more from professional criticism than it received. And it received exactly what it deserved from the public. In the end, the 2010 Karate Kid ends the same way it started, with a simple movement. Dre Parker, at the end of the film, is standing up, with a trophy, with a master at his side, with a city around him that is no longer completely strange. He arrived as a boy who didn't know where he was. He left as someone who knows who he is. That is all any coming-of-age story needs to do, and this film did it.